This was back when I was 15, and over summer, my parents went on a yearly business getaway trip with my dad's work. A few years before this, we'd moved into an older house that had been in my dad's family for a long time. It was on a large wooded property, and up until then, they had been renting it out. But the place started to have too many problems, so I guess my parents decided to move into it. That way they could save money on not having a mortgage or rent payment, and could use the extra money toward fixing up the place. The obvious downside was we had to live there while things broke all the time. They made tons of renovations, but it was just so old and massive that you really couldn't change everything, and it still had that old, musty feel to it. Even the renovated parts felt off because you knew underneath it all, the place was still that same 150-year-old house. I honestly never really liked it, and neither did my parents, but we dealt with it. Back to what happened though. My parents were gone for 4 days, and being summer break, I didn't have anything to do. I'd wake up, make a bowl of cereal, and hop on the PlayStation all day, and repeat that pretty much every day, whether my parents were home or not. That's exactly how the first day went up until around 9 p.m. I don't remember if I was actually in the middle of playing something, but I know I was in my room with the TV screen on, either gaming or watching YouTube or just hanging around the room, when suddenly everything went dark. I immediately knew the power had cut out. I got up and opened the door, then just stood still for a second, unsure what exactly to do. I hoped it would fix itself and just come right back on in a few seconds, which is usually what would happen when the lights went out like this. But I also had no way to really know if this was a house problem or an area-wide problem, because looking out the windows, I had no view of any other houses. It was just woods as far as I could see in all directions. I turned my phone light on and started walking through the hall and down to the first floor. I don't think I even have to describe how creepy this old place was without any power on. It was dark, quiet, and unsettling. The house constantly creaked, and every long, unlit hallway was disturbingly pitch dark. Couldn't see a damn thing that wasn't directly where I was shining my light at. Worse yet was my mind constantly reminding me that I was in some old, massive house in the middle of the woods, with no help even remotely close. I held myself together pretty well though. I ended up sitting close to a big window in the living room that let in just a tiny bit of moonlight, so I wasn't in absolute darkness. Then I texted my parents. I had 5G luckily working, letting me at least text them. While I waited for a response, I kept looking around at every shadow in the home. I don't know if my eyes were just playing tricks on me, but I could have sworn I kept seeing something move in the dark, just barely enough for me to see, but I could never get a good enough look, and I was honestly too nervous to go around searching. After a few minutes, they texted me back where the breaker panel was. And yeah, I probably should have been old enough to know this, but it was a big old house. I thought it could literally be hiding anywhere, and I again did not want to go wandering around in the dark looking for it. My dad said it was in the back right corner of the basement. I wouldn't say I was necessarily scared of basements, but I will say I'd only been in the basement of this house a couple of times. It was unfinished and full of my grandparents' stuff that they left behind, which was all covered up by these large white tarps to protect them from mold and dust. Not so creepy in the day, but as soon as I walked down there in the dark with just my tiny phone light, it was unsettling as hell. Also, it smelled awful down there. More so than just that old, musty smell that all old houses have. I walked between all the scattered stuff and boxes. I found the breaker panel, and the door thing was already open. I wasn't too sure how these worked, but I knew the big switch was the main one. So I clicked it over, and everything instantly turned back on. What I didn't know was that if the main power had cut or tripped on its own, the switch wouldn't have been flipped like I found it. It would have been loose, and I'd have to manually turn it off, then on. But being oblivious to this at the time, I had no idea, and was just relieved to see the power was back on. I turned my phone light off and closed the panel, then started to walk toward the stairs. But not even 15 seconds had passed from me turning the breaker back on before suddenly heavy running footsteps came from right above me, somewhere on the first floor. I embarrassingly almost fell down because of the suddenness of it. Then I started to hear the footsteps slow down. It got quiet for a second, and I moved behind a stack of boxes, still breathing heavily from my heart racing. Then, slowly, steady footsteps started to come down the creaky wooden basement staircase. I quietly moved under the tarp just to be even more hidden. The person stopped when they got to the bottom of the steps, like they were waiting or looking around. Then they started walking, going between the boxes and up to the breaker panel. He turned it off again, but I didn't hear him walk away. For maybe 5 whole minutes, there wasn't a sound at all, like he was just standing there and waiting. I was sure he knew I was down there, which was fucking terrifying. But when he started moving again, it was very quick. The guy just began sprinting through the dark, straight up the stairs, and slammed the basement door shut. I quickly took my phone back out and texted my parents. I know, I should have gone straight to contacting the police. But to be fair, I didn't even know you could text 911, and so I thought it was safer to text my parents to call them for me, so I didn't have to make any noise. From the moment the guy ran upstairs to the police knocking on the door, it was about 15 minutes. The guy was gone, but they did find that the cellar doors, those old flip-out ones on the outside of the house that led to the basement, had the padlock cut off. No idea when that happened, because I never heard it. My parents came home immediately, and over the next few weeks, we were in contact with the police almost every single day. The problem was that we had no idea why the person broke in, or what he was doing with the power, or really any reason for anything that happened that night. So the whole case went cold. I still find it incredibly disturbing to think about that first 15 minutes of the blackout, when I was sitting in the pitch black, seeing shadows moving around in the dark, now knowing that he was up there with me. We moved out a few months afterward, and my parents sold the place, so I never had anything else happen, and haven't heard anything since then. Back when I was in my later high school years, I had 2 best friends that I hung out with almost daily. I'll call them Brian and Chase. Now, Chase had really strict parents, at least compared to me and Brian. He always had some sort of curfew for when he had to be home by, and we were never allowed to go over to Chase's house to hang out or whatever. It never bothered us. Honestly, I don't think we ever even really thought about it much, since we would just hang out at either mine or Brian's house. But one weekend, Chase randomly came up to us and told us his parents were gone for both Friday night and Saturday night, and that we could come over to his place to hang out, or maybe even sleep over, since we'd have it all to ourselves. Obviously, me and Brian were on board with it, and didn't even think twice. What teenagers wouldn't want to have a house to themselves to do whatever the hell they wanted, without parents constantly keeping watch? After school that day, I headed home and got some of my sleeping stuff, like a toothbrush and a spare pillow. I realized I never even knew his address until that day when I texted him, asking where he lived. I didn't have a car either, so I had to bike there. He lived about 20 minutes from me in a neighborhood I was unfamiliar with. I actually met up with Brian on the way there, and we both biked to Chase's house together. It was on a forested road, one of those neighborhoods that almost felt hidden from the rest of the town. Each house was separated and had trees covering every inch of the property. And both me and Brian were pretty shocked when we finally rode up to the address Chase had given us. It was a huge house. Hell, I'd even consider it a mansion. Sort of old, like it'd probably been around for 100 years. I almost didn't believe this was where he lived and thought this all might have been some weird prank. But Chase came outside and showed us in. The house was very well taken care of on the inside, though it was still very old-fashioned. In my opinion, it was super ugly, but I know some people just like that old money type of look. But the whole place was also really dark, as even though it was big, the mansion barely had any windows, and the ones it did have were small. Chase didn't really give us too much of a tour though, and we basically just went right downstairs to the basement. The basement was like another living room, with a TV, Xbox 360, a couch, and a few small side rooms. For the first several hours, until around 10 p.m., we played Call of Duty on the Xbox and just had a good time hanging out. Pretty typical night for us. After that, Chase kind of randomly mentioned that he had some drinks upstairs that he'd bring down for us. He left the basement, and we could basically hear every footstep as he walked around above us. The mansion must have had thin walls or something. Me and Brian waited and talked for a few minutes, waiting for Chase to come back down, before we started to hear muffled voices above us. We both immediately stopped our conversation and looked at each other confused, then stared at the ceiling, listening to it. Someone else was in the house with us. I thought that we could pretty clearly hear Chase and this other person talking back and forth. Of course, both of us were under the impression that we had the house to ourselves, so who the hell was he talking to? I got up and told Brian I was going to go check who it was, or at least try to listen to see if something weird was going on. I started walking up the steps and opened the basement door, which, come to think of it, kinda weird Chase had even closed it behind him. That is, if we were actually alone. But when I opened it, the door made a really loud creak that reverberated through the whole mansion. Instantly, both voices stopped. My stomach tightened for a second. A strange, unsettled feeling immediately hit me, almost like a fight-or-flight response. I then walked down the hallway a bit before Chase suddenly came around the corner and looked startled, like I'd scared him. "Who were you talking to? I thought we had the house to ourselves, like we were alone here." Chase shook his head and asked what I was talking about. He then raised up the drinks, showing he got them, and walked past me, back down into the basement. Brian asked him the same question, but Chase again said that no one else was here. He genuinely looked like he thought we were crazy, and after a few minutes, we eventually dropped the conversation, just assuming we were wrong somehow. I think in my head, I thought Chase's answer seemed genuine, and so I thought he was probably just talking to himself, or maybe embarrassingly singing to himself, and we thought it was a different voice. I don't know, but I ended up forgetting about it. We stayed up for another few hours. It was clear all of us were tired by 1 a.m., so we got ready for bed. Chase and Brian slept on opposite sides of the couch, and I slept on the floor with a sleeping bag. We turned off all the lights, and I laid down. I don't remember anything else after getting in the sleeping bag, so I assumed I just fell asleep a few minutes later. When I woke up, the only light in the whole basement was the small digital clock on the TV stand with glowing red numbers that read 3:14. I felt weirdly awake though. I rolled over and looked at the couch, and all of a sudden, my stomach tightened again. That same flight or fight response. Neither Chase or Brian was there. I immediately sat up and looked around. Obviously, both of them being gone was weird as hell, but it was also pretty freaky to know I was alone in the pitch-dark basement of some random old mansion. I quickly felt my way over to the lights, doing another quick look around and not seeing either of them. I even called out in a whisper, saying Brian and Chase over and over again. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but that aching gut feeling was really scaring me. I then looked up the staircase at the basement door. It was closed. Again, if they had left, why close the door behind them? But while I was at the bottom of the steps, I started to hear something. These soft, muffled thumps, somewhere on one of the upper floors of the mansion. Someone walking down a hallway, then a door opening, and then they walked back down the hallway again. I stayed there and listened, and they must have gone back and forth 4 or 5 times. I was really starting to freak out. I hurried up and opened the door. All the lights were still off in all the rooms and hallways. I didn't even know where any of the light switches were, so I just felt my way down toward the front door. "Alex?" Chase said my name from the top of the staircase behind me. I swung around, completely jump-scared. "Bro, what are you doing? Are you leaving?" I asked him what he was doing, and where the hell Brian was. He looked at me confused and asked what I meant by where Brian was. After a few back and forths, Chase said he went to sleep up in his room because he couldn't fall asleep on the couch, and that last he saw, Brian was still down there in the basement on the couch sleeping. We both went back down to the basement and looked, and like I said, he wasn't down there. Then we turned on all the lights and looked in every room, but he was not in the house. Also worth mentioning, I didn't find anyone else in the house either. I then decided to go outside and look at our bikes, assuming he must have left for some reason. But Brian's bike was still right there next to mine, just off the driveway in the bushes, right where we'd left them. Me and Chase searched the house for 2 hours, until 5 a.m., before finally realizing this was serious and calling the police. The whole thing was a mess. Chase's parents were furious and cut all contact between me and Chase, probably figuring I had something to do with it. I hoped Brian would show up in the few days following, but he didn't. Weeks and then months passed. They didn't even find any clues or signs of break-ins the night he went missing, and both me and Chase claimed to be sleeping. But I keep thinking back to hearing Chase talking to someone upstairs, and the thumps I heard, and just feeling like something else was going on in there that was hidden from me. Also, why did Brian go missing and not me, or Chase? Or what if I'd woken up sooner? Maybe things would be different. I don't know. I never talked to Chase after that, and I never got any answers. The town I grew up in was pretty small and unremarkable. Just your regular small town a couple hours out from the major city. Most of it I would consider kind of trashy. Lots of older, small houses, and just not the best area all around. But at some point, well before I was born, I guess some rich families decided to build these large, fancy houses on the outskirts of the town away from all the trashiness. Don't know why they didn't just move away, but whatever. Eventually, they figured it out and did move. But nobody here could afford those places, and nobody who didn't already live here wanted to move here. So those big mansion-style houses on the edge of town were left abandoned. That's what I was told happened, anyway. When I was in high school, me and my two friends, Josh and Caden, thought of this great idea to explore one of the mansions out there. We had no reason other than just the thrill of going urban exploring, but we were all pretty excited for it. We all met up outside my house at 10 p.m., and none of us having a car or license, we walked for about an hour all the way out to the woods where the large houses were built. There was only one road in and one road out, so no way to get lost. The road was well overgrown by then, and even most of the asphalt was degraded or split into chunks with roots and bushes and stuff growing through the cracks. After the long walk, we got up to the mansion. Of the few that were out there, this is the one we chose because it was the farthest and deepest into the woods, which we assumed would make it the least explored. It was very run down and weathered, almost had no color left to the outside, like it was just this dying gray structure. It was very creepy looking, and I know I would definitely not be there if I didn't have two of my buddies with me. We walked up to the doorway. The actual door had been broken off and was laying on the porch, so we basically just walked right in. Josh was the only one with a real flashlight. Me and Caden were using our phones. I think the easiest way to describe this place is probably exactly how you're imagining it. Huge wooden staircase spiraling up the middle of the house right at the entrance, and just old stuff everywhere. There was also a thick layer of dust in the air that made it hard to clearly see anything, even with the flashlights. All of us were tripping over stuff. Most of the downstairs rooms had broken furniture and old decor scattered all over the floors. Because of how hard it was to navigate, we only stayed down there for maybe a minute before heading up the main staircase to the next floor. At the top of the stairs was a long hallway, and it was empty. No broken stuff or anything on the floor. But all three of us immediately were hit by a very strong odor. It was so bad that Josh went right back down to the bottom of the stairs, saying he wasn't going any further. Me and Caden decided to keep walking down the hall, though, to figure out what it was. Splitting up was really stupid, especially since Josh was the only one with a good flashlight. But for whatever reason, I was really intrigued by whatever the hell was down that hallway. All the doors were open except for one at the end. Kind of made it creepier though, walking past each of the open pitch-black rooms, knowing anything could be hiding in there. We were only 3 or 4 steps away from the last door, when suddenly we heard a door slam downstairs. "Josh?" My voice echoed down the hall. "Josh, you good? Hello?" Josh wasn't responding. Of course, at that point, we completely forgot about the door and started hurrying back to the top of the stairs. Josh wasn't down there, and even stranger, his light wasn't on either. Even if he had gone deeper into the house, we should have been able to see some sort of light because of how dark it was in here. Then we heard footsteps on the floorboards, walking slowly from the back of the house up to the front until they were right below us, but they stopped before entering the entrance room. I was gonna call out Josh again, but in that moment, something in me was 100% sure it wasn't Josh. It was someone else. But then, where the hell was Josh at? I could tell from the look on Caden's face as well that he didn't believe it was Josh either. The person below us didn't move for a whole minute. Then, instead of continuing to walk into the entrance room, they turned around and started going back. And maybe 20 seconds later, We heard knocking, like light tapping on a wall, as if trying to signal something. And it was definitely on purpose, because they kept doing it. Caden asked in a whisper if I thought that was Josh maybe trying to tell us where he was. He didn't really seem to believe it, but I mean, if someone else was in here, why didn't Josh call out for help or something? Maybe he was just messing with us. We started walking down the steps to the first floor. Even if it wasn't Josh, this person had to know where we were anyway, and I'd rather be by the front door than still upstairs with nowhere to run. The tapping sounds kept going all the way until we were right at the front hallway. It was very dark, and my phone light did nothing at all. All I could see was dust and total blackness. I took a few steps in, and I started to barely be able to see a figure in the dark, and at the very same time I heard a voice behind me. It was Josh. He was outside the house, whispering for us to get the hell out of there. We started making a dead sprint for the doorway, and I could hear someone move in the hallway behind us. I don't know if they were trying to chase us for a second or what, but we got out of there and ran all the way back. Once we were out of the woods, Josh explained that he was standing down there when he heard someone outside. And before he could tell us, he had to hide and turn off his flashlight because the man was already so close. He basically heard him walking up, then the man walked through the doorway 5 seconds later. Josh watched as the guy stared up the staircase, like he knew we were up there. Then he walked down the hall, and that's when Josh moved out the doorway to hopefully not be seen and wait for a chance to help us get out of there. A few seconds later, we heard the door slam and all the tapping. Josh was absolutely sure that from the looks of it, the man was not only following us, but also trying to lead us deeper into the house by making noise. It just seemed like it wasn't a random encounter. We don't know what was going on in that house, what was in the room, or what the man wanted with us had we followed the sounds any further.